Welcome back to AgriTalk as we wrap things up here in St. Louis at the American Veterinary Medical Association. Good to have back with us Dr. Liz Wagstrom, Chief Veterinary Officer for the National Pork Producers Council. Haven't seen you since, World Pork Expo.
Great to see you again. It's good to see you in a different venue.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about different venue, but some of the same issues. We've had the United Egg Producers decision to work with HSUS and seek federal legislation. Now, I know this really has the beef and pork industry's concerned about this approach to one size fits all. Let's talk about the concerns the pork industry has with that concept.
Yeah, we have real concerns, and largely because scientific studies on housing for sows shows that husbandry can make a difference in what animal care animal receives in any type of housing system. There are benefits and there are disadvantages to each housing system. And so if you've got the right husbandry, you can make a housing system work across a variety of housing systems. So to go to a one-size-fits-all and have that legislated by people that may not say there are new technology that may come along in the future that would be a benefit is really disturbing.
Let's talk about these undercover videos that keep popping up. Now, let me state again, no one is condoning abuse of animals and bad behavior by producers. So, again, no one's condoning that. But we know in some cases some of these things are taken somewhat out of context with some editing and some misrepresentation, those types of things. But the key here is, I think, and I touched on this earlier, with so many of the people in this country not familiar with animal production, that even if they saw how things are done completely correctly, the best possible ways of dealing with it, some of those things would bother people that have never seen what goes on in a livestock facility.
Absolutely, and that was the latest video. Was the concern over that was that a lot of the things they showed were standard production practices, and there was some misconduct there, when we can't condone that. But with a population that's very far removed from the farm, they don't understand how production happens. And so we're going to have to work very hard with the public and with the retailers to set a standard operating practices that are acceptable and that can be defended. And then the undercover videos that call standard operating practices cruelty, we'll have a backup position for.
Which has been a goal for the pork industry for some time, addressing those issues.
Absolutely. Pork Quality Assurance Plus, which includes an on-farm site assessment, looking for animal care standards, is a huge step. And our retailers and our customers in the packing industry count a lot on Pork Quality Assurance Plus as a reassurance that things are being done right.
We're talking with Dr. Liz Wagstrom, Chief Veterinary Officer for the National Pork Producers Council. Let's talk again about the antibiotic issue, because it gets a lot of attention and consumers read or hear something about antibiotic use in animals and they're thinking, why is it there? Does that affect the meat I eat? Does that then affect my health? There's still a lot of education that needs to be done on this with consumers.
There is, and what was very interesting, I gave a talk from the industry point of view on antibiotic use, and then one of the public health veterinarians gave a talk on the public health point of view, and it was so interesting to see we cited the same literature, we had a lot of the same points, and the point is that if antibiotics are used responsibly and there are health benefits and we're producing a safe food supply, they're one tool in a toolbox. And we both talks cited risk assessments that show that there's a very, very small risk to human health from any antibiotic use in animals. Where we differed is that risk acceptable? And we cited on my talk also a literature that showed if you withdrew antibiotics, you may end up actually with more foodborne illness, because some animals that have been sick and recovered will go to slaughter. Instead of preventing that illness, we've had sick animals, they go to slaughter, and those carcasses are more likely to be contaminated.
We hear these horror stories, though, and we hear about building up resistance and immunity to antibiotics to render them almost helpless and creating a situation where we're more vulnerable. How big a concern is that?
It is a concern in hospitals with human pathogens. We're not seeing as much of a concern with foodborne pathogens, which is where you might see an impact from antibiotic use in animals. And in fact, the National Antimicrobial Resistance Monitoring System has data that starts in 1997 that shows that the same amount of resistance in pathogens is equal now to what it was in 1997. There's no upward trend. And in fact, in the pathogens from pork chops, which there are very few, but those that they do get, we see resistance actually declining.
The key with antibiotics or anything else is proper use, proper management, right?
Absolutely, and that's another thing that Pork Quality Assurance Plus actually assesses on the farm. Is a veterinarian involved in decision making? Do we have proper record keeping for antibiotics? And it's a big portion of the Pork Quality Assurance Plus that's required.
We keep hearing about how Europe approaches it or what Europe does, like we should always follow everything that happens there, but what is the lesson we learn from what they're doing with antibiotics in their production?
That's a great question. We learned a couple, I think, real vital points. One is that when they withdrew antibiotic growth promoters, they saw big increases in post-weaning illness, diarrhea in their pigs. So there were health benefits to those uses of antibiotics. The other thing we saw is that they increased therapeutic use of antibiotics to the point where they're now using as many therapeutic antibiotics as they used to use growth promoters, and that those antibiotics are in classes that are important to human health. So I think that they have showed us a great experiment of what could happen, and we're surely hoping that the United States does not follow that experiment.
Our media likes to really go with worst case scenarios and use that as an example. Not that you can ignore those things, but they tend to mislead people in thinking that it's something more widespread than it is.
Absolutely, and we can't deny that there are human antibiotic resistant issues. Most of those come in hospitals. Most of those are due to human use of antibiotics. There is a small portion of foodborne illness that may be resistant to antibiotics that could be impacted by what we do on the farm. So we need to be very careful about what we do on the farm. We need to keep veterinarians involved, and we need to work for continuous improvement.
And I was going to close with that role, that relationship between producer and veterinarian is a critical.
It's essential, and that's why it's the first assessment point that we have in our PQA assessment. Do you have a veterinary client-patient relationship, and are veterinarians involved in the management decisions you make on your farm?
Good to see you again.
Great, thanks for having me.
Dr. Liz Wagstrom, Chief Veterinary Officer for the National Pork Producers Council, as we wrap up our broadcast here at the American Veterinary Medical Association Annual Convention in St. Louis. Again, our thanks for the great hospitality that AVMA has shown us. We've enjoyed being here as part of their convention. Again, our poll question this week at agritalk.com, we're asking you, do you think the United Egg Producers made the right decision by agreeing to work with HSUS on new federal legislation for the egg industry? Yes or no? Log on and vote at agritalk.com. Tomorrow, we'll look at the problem of Asian carp in our rivers and how one Illinois official thinks the best way to address that negative or that problem is to turn it into a positive. Use those fish to help feed the hungry. We'll find out what they have in mind. That's next tomorrow on AgriTalk.